At my son's wedding reception, surrounded by 200 guests in the garden I had cultivated for 30 years, my daughter-in-law Jessica raised her champagne glass high and declared with a triumphant smile, "To the new owner of this house." The words cut through the celebration like a blade. I stood there, holding my own glass, watching her eyes gleam with premature victory. I said nothing. But in that moment, I knew that when she returned from her honeymoon, her world would be forever changed. Can you imagine being dismissed as irrelevant in your own home by someone who had been part of your family for barely 2 years? What would you do if someone you trusted completely showed their true colors at the moment they thought they had won? I remained silent during the toast, accepting the congratulations and awkward glances from guests who had heard her declaration. But I already knew that the day she returned from her honeymoon, my response would teach her a lesson she would never forget. My name is Hannah Collins. I am 62 years old, and until 5 years ago, I was a senior partner at Morrison & Associates, one of the most respected law firms in the state. I spent 4 decades building my career, specializing in family and inheritance law. I sacrificed countless evenings and weekends, missing school plays and birthday parties, all to provide my son David with the best possible future. When I retired, I thought I could finally enjoy the fruits of my labor in the home I had bought and renovated with my own hands, sharing peaceful moments with my family. How naive I was. David met Jessica 3 years ago at a corporate event. She was 28, beautiful, and worked in marketing for a technology company. From the beginning, she showed herself to be charming and attentive, especially with me. She would bring me flowers, ask for recipes, and say she wanted to learn to be the perfect daughter-in-law. I welcomed her with open arms, happy to see my son in love after his difficult divorce. The first signs of her true nature appeared gradually, like small cracks in a seemingly perfect facade. She would make subtle comments about the house's decoration, suggesting it needed modernization. She would ask detailed questions about my finances, disguised as concern for my retirement security. She convinced David that I was too alone in such a big house, and that it would be healthier if I considered moving to a smaller place. But the wedding day was when the mask finally fell. The ceremony was beautiful, held in the garden I had designed myself. I had invested $25,000 of my own money to make everything perfect, from the imported flowers to the crystal dinnerware. I wanted David's day to be unforgettable, and I spared no expense. Jessica's parents contributed very little, claiming they were going through financial difficulties. During the reception, I noticed how she moved through the house as if she already owned it. She was giving tours to her friends, pointing out improvements she planned to make. She talked about the master bedroom as if it were already hers, and mentioned converting my home office into a proper living room. Then came the moment of the toast. Jessica stood up, tapping her glass to get everyone's attention. "I want to thank everyone for being here on this special day," she began with that practiced smile I had come to know so well. "And I want to make a special toast." She looked directly at me, and I saw something in her eyes that made my blood run cold. "To Hannah, who has been so generous in welcoming me into this family, and now, finally, to the new owner of this house." The silence that followed was deafening. Some guests looked confused, others uncomfortable. David seemed as surprised as I was, but he smiled nervously and raised his glass. I felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. I could have made a scene. I could have corrected her publicly, humiliated her in front of all those people. But 4 decades as a lawyer had taught me something valuable. The most devastating victories are won in silence, with precision and patience. I raised my glass with a serene smile and said simply, "To new beginnings." Everyone toasted, but I noticed several guests exchanging concerned glances. That night, after all the guests had left and the newlyweds had departed for their honeymoon in Europe, I sat in my office and opened my laptop. I had 2 weeks to prepare for their return, and I intended to use every minute wisely. Jessica had made a critical mistake. She had assumed that because I was 62 and retired, I was weak and easily manipulable. She had no idea who she was dealing with. She didn't know that I had spent decades protecting families from predators exactly like her. She didn't know that I had connections throughout the legal system and access to resources she couldn't imagine. But most importantly, she didn't know that the house she so arrogantly claimed as hers had legal protections she had never bothered to investigate. As I began to review documents and make phone calls, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: the thrill of the hunt. Jessica wanted to play games with someone else's life and property. Perfect. I would show her how the game is really played. If you've ever felt underestimated because of your age, subscribe and tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to deal with someone who tried to take advantage of your apparent vulnerability? Because what I'm about to tell you next will show you exactly how to turn that supposed weakness into your greatest strength. The honeymoon would last 2 weeks. When they returned, Jessica would discover that her premature victory celebration had been the biggest mistake of her life. The morning after the wedding, I woke up at 5:30, as I had every day for the past 40 years. But this time, instead of my usual coffee and newspaper routine, I had a mission. Jessica's arrogant toast had awakened something in me that had been dormant since my retirement: my predatory instinct for justice. I started with what I knew best: legal research. In my home office, surrounded by law books and case files I had accumulated over 4 decades, I opened the safe where I kept my most important documents: the deed to the house, my will, trust documents, financial records, everything Jessica thought she understood, but clearly didn't. The first thing I discovered was even more disturbing than I had imagined. 3 days before the wedding, David had visited my lawyer's office. My assistant from the firm, Margaret, who had remained a close friend after my retirement, called me with information that made my blood boil. David had inquired about the process of updating my will, specifically asking about scenarios where I might be declared incapacitated due to age, and how property transfers would work in such cases. Margaret, bless her soul, had immediately sensed something was wrong. She had worked with me long enough to know I was sharper at 62 than most people half my age. She told David that any changes to my will would require my personal presence and a thorough mental competency evaluation. But the fact that he had even asked these questions revealed the true scope of their plan. This wasn't just about Jessica wanting my house. This was a calculated conspiracy to have me declared incompetent so they could take control of my assets. I spent the next 2 hours making phone calls to old colleagues and contacts. The legal community is smaller than people think, and favors accumulated over 4 decades are powerful currency. By noon, I had a complete picture of what I was dealing with. Dr. Richard Hayes, a psychiatrist who specialized in elderly mental competency evaluations, had received a call from David 2 weeks before the wedding. David had asked about preliminary consultations for evaluating his mother's increasing forgetfulness and confusion. Dr. Hayes, fortunately, was someone I had worked with on several cases involving elderly abuse. He found David's approach suspicious and had documented everything. But the most shocking revelation came from my bank manager, Patricia Walsh. Jessica had visited the bank a week before the wedding, presenting herself as my future daughter-in-law and asking detailed questions about my accounts, investment portfolios, and loan procedures. She had specifically inquired about power of attorney processes and what documentation would be needed to access my accounts in case of emergency. Patricia, who had known me for 15 years, had found Jessica's questions so inappropriate that she had made detailed notes of the conversation. She told me that Jessica had seemed particularly interested in the value of my investment portfolio, over $800,000, and had asked about the fastest way to liquidate assets. I felt a cold rage building inside me as the pieces of their plan became clear. They intended to have me declared incompetent, gain control of my assets, and probably convince everyone that I was lucky to be cared for in some assisted living facility while they enjoyed the fruits of my life's work. The arrogance of it all was breathtaking. Jessica had been so confident in her plan that she couldn't resist gloating at the wedding, declaring herself the new owner in front of 200 witnesses. She thought she was dealing with a vulnerable old woman who would be easy to manipulate and discard. She had no idea she was dealing with Hannah Collins. I spent the afternoon reviewing case files from my own practice, looking for similar situations I had handled. I had seen this pattern dozens of times. Young spouses or children who viewed elderly family members as obstacles to wealth rather than people deserving of respect and care. I had built my reputation destroying predators like Jessica, and I had never lost a case. But this time it was personal. By evening, I had assembled a preliminary strategy. I would need evidence of their conspiracy, documentation of their attempts to manipulate financial institutions and medical professionals, and most importantly, I would need to protect my assets before they could make any legal moves. I called my old friend James Morrison, the founding partner of my former firm. Even though I had retired, he assured me that the firm's resources were at my disposal. "Hannah," he said, "if someone is trying to play games with you, they picked the wrong opponent. What do you need?" I smiled for the first time since the wedding. "I need a private investigator, a forensic accountant, and complete discretion. And James? I want everything documented to the smallest detail. When I'm done with them, their case will be so airtight that no lawyer in the state will dare represent them." The next morning, I received a call that confirmed my worst suspicions. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who lived next door and had always been discreet about neighborhood affairs, asked if she could speak with me privately. She had overheard a conversation between David and Jessica in my garden the night before the wedding. "Hannah, dear," she said, her voice trembling with indignation. "I didn't want to believe what I was hearing, but I think you need to know. They were talking about how long it would take to resolve your situation after the wedding. Jessica said she had already researched assisted living facilities and that the house would need immediate renovations to erase your old lady taste." David seemed uncomfortable, but he didn't object. Mrs. Patterson had lived next door for 20 years. She had watched me build my career, had seen me work late into the night on important cases, had witnessed my dedication to David throughout his childhood. The fact that she felt compelled to share this information spoke volumes about how disturbed she was by what she had heard. That afternoon, I received an envelope with photos that made my hands shake with rage. My private investigator, Robert Chen, had been even more efficient than I expected. The photos showed Jessica at a furniture store 2 days after the wedding before leaving for her honeymoon. She was selecting furniture and giving my address for delivery after she returned from her trip. But the most damaging photo showed her at a real estate office, speaking with an agent about preparing a property for quick sale and asking about market values in my neighborhood. She wasn't just planning to steal my house, she was planning to sell it. As I sat in my office that evening, looking at the evidence accumulating on my desk, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The pure, crystalline clarity that came with righteous anger channeled through professional expertise. Jessica had made the mistake of her life when she decided to target me. She thought she was dealing with a lonely old woman who would be grateful for their company and too confused to protect herself. Instead, she had declared war on someone who had spent 4 decades learning exactly how to destroy people like her. The honeymoon would end in 10 days. By then, I would have everything I needed to show them what real power looked like. On the 3rd day of their honeymoon, while Jessica was probably posting romantic photos from Paris on social media, I was sitting in a conference room at Morrison & Associates, surrounded by 3 of the best legal minds in the state. What Jessica didn't know was that retirement hadn't diminished my influence. It had simply freed me to be more strategic about how I used it. James Morrison had assembled what he called a dream team for my situation. Sarah Chen, the firm's top investigative attorney who specialized in financial fraud. Michael Torres, a forensic accountant who had helped me win several major inheritance cases. And Detective Linda Walsh, Patricia's sister from the bank, who had recently retired from the police force and now worked as a private investigator specializing in elder abuse cases. "Hannah," James said as he spread the preliminary evidence across the mahogany table. "In 40 years of practicing law, I've never seen a case with this much documentation in just 3 days. They weren't just sloppy. They were arrogant to the point of stupidity." Sarah had already pulled Jessica's financial records, and what we found was fascinating. 3 months before meeting David, Jessica had been fired from her marketing job for inappropriate conduct with client confidential information. She had been living off credit cards and temporary work ever since. Her interest in David hadn't been romantic. It had been financial desperation disguised as love. But the most damning evidence came from Michael's forensic analysis. Using his connections with financial institutions, he had traced a pattern of behavior that revealed the true scope of their plan. 2 weeks before the wedding, Jessica had opened several new credit accounts using my address as her permanent residence. She had also applied for a business loan, listing my house as collateral and claiming she had verbal permission from the property owner. "This isn't just attempted fraud," Michael explained, pointing to bank documents spread across the table. "This is a comprehensive financial identity theft scheme. She was preparing to use your property and credit history to secure funding before they even had legal access to anything." Detective Walsh had uncovered the most disturbing information. Through her contacts in social services, she had discovered that Jessica had researched commitment procedures for elderly individuals, downloaded forms for mental competency challenges, and even contacted 2 different assisted living facilities asking about emergency placement for a family member experiencing sudden cognitive decline. The coldness of their planning was breathtaking. This wasn't a spontaneous decision born of greed. It was a calculated, step-by-step plan to destroy my independence and steal everything I had worked for. But I had something they hadn't counted on: 4 decades of experience dealing with exactly this type of predator and the resources to fight back properly. "I want to show you something," I said, opening my briefcase and pulling out a thick folder. "This is why Jessica chose the wrong target. For the past 3 days, while they had been honeymooning in Europe, I had been constructing something Jessica couldn't have imagined in her worst nightmares. A comprehensive legal trap that would not only protect my assets, but would provide enough evidence to pursue criminal charges against both of them. First, I had created an irrevocable trust, transferring ownership of my house and major assets into a legal structure that made it impossible for anyone to claim ownership through power of attorney or competency challenges. The trust was managed by Morrison & Associates, with clear instructions that any attempts to access the assets required unanimous agreement from 3 independent trustees, all of whom were legal professionals who had known me for decades. Second, I had documented every single conversation, every bank inquiry, every suspicious behavior they had exhibited. Using my legal training, I had created a timeline that showed clear criminal intent and conspiracy to commit fraud. But the most brilliant part of my strategy was something I had learned from decades of family law. Sometimes the most effective justice comes not from courts, but from natural consequences delivered at exactly the right moment. "What I'm about to show you," I told the team, "is going to demonstrate why patience is the lawyer's greatest weapon." I had discovered that Jessica had been so confident in her plan that she had made promises she couldn't keep. Through social media monitoring, something Detective Walsh had taught me, I had found evidence that Jessica had borrowed significant money from her friends and family, promising to pay them back as soon as she had access to her mother-in-law's assets. She had told her sister she would lend her $15,000 for a down payment on a car. She had promised her best friend funding for a business venture. She had even committed to paying for her parents' cruise, claiming she would have full access to substantial family wealth after the wedding. Jessica had spent money she didn't have based on assets she couldn't legally access with people who wouldn't hesitate to make her life miserable when she couldn't deliver on her promises. "She's created a web of expectations and financial commitments," Sarah observed, studying the evidence. "When she can't access your assets, she'll face pressure from multiple directions simultaneously." But I had saved the best revelation for last. "There's something else," I said, pulling out a document that made everyone in the room gasp. "David isn't just a victim of manipulation. He's a willing participant." The document was a copy of a loan application David had submitted to 3 different banks, using my house as collateral without my knowledge or consent. He had forged my signature on preliminary documents and claimed I had verbally agreed to secure a $200,000 loan for home improvements and family investments. The loan applications had been rejected because the banks had contacted me directly for verification, a standard procedure I had insisted on years ago after handling too many cases of elderly financial abuse. But David's willingness to forge my signature revealed that this conspiracy went deeper than I had initially realized. My own son was prepared to sacrifice my financial security and independence for his new wife's greed. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Jessica could have done alone. I had raised David, sacrificed my own happiness for his education and opportunities, and trusted him with every important decision in my life. And he had repaid that trust by planning to have me declared incompetent so they could steal everything I had worked for. Hannah, James said gently, seeing the pain in my eyes, I know this is difficult, but you need to understand, you're not just protecting yourself anymore. If we don't stop them now, they'll do this to other families. This is their pattern, not a one-time mistake. He was right. Jessica and David had revealed themselves to be predators who viewed elderly family members as obstacles to wealth rather than people deserving of respect and protection. If I didn't stop them decisively, they would continue this pattern with other vulnerable targets. By the end of that meeting, we had constructed what Sarah called the most comprehensive elder abuse prevention case she had ever seen. Every document, every conversation, every fraudulent attempt had been cataloged and verified. We had testimony from bank officials, medical professionals, and neighbors. We had financial records showing clear criminal intent. But most importantly, we had a plan that would not only protect me, but would serve as a warning to anyone else who might consider targeting elderly family members for financial exploitation. The honeymoon would end in 7 days. When Jessica walked through my door expecting to find a confused old woman ready to be manipulated, she would instead face the full weight of a legal system that protected people like me from predators like her. I had spent 40 years learning how to destroy people who threatened families and exploited the vulnerable. Now I was going to use every single lesson I had learned to teach Jessica and David what happened when you targeted the wrong person. The house Jessica had so arrogantly claimed would become the stage for their complete and utter defeat. On the 5th day of their European honeymoon, while Jessica was undoubtedly shopping for furniture she planned to put in her house, I received a phone call that changed everything. The voice on the other end belonged to someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year, but whose call couldn't have been more perfectly timed. Mrs. Collins, this is Amanda Richardson. I was Jessica's supervisor at Meridian Technologies before she was terminated. Amanda explained that she had seen the wedding announcement in the local newspaper and felt compelled to reach out. What she told me over the next hour made my blood run cold, but also filled me with a sense of vindication that my instincts about Jessica had been absolutely correct. Mrs. Collins, I need you to understand what kind of person your son married, Amanda said, her voice heavy with concern. Jessica wasn't just fired for inappropriate conduct. She was terminated for systematically stealing client information and using it to blackmail wealthy older clients into giving her money. The story Amanda revealed was worse than anything I had imagined. Jessica had been using her access to client marketing data to identify elderly individuals with substantial assets. She would research their family situations, find points of vulnerability, and then approach them with carefully crafted sob stories designed to extract loans and investments that were never intended to be repaid. She specifically targeted people over 60 who lived alone or had recently experienced family changes, Amanda continued. She would research their backgrounds, their interests, their weaknesses, and then present herself as someone who needed help. She was incredibly good at it, charming, convincing, and completely ruthless. Amanda had documentation of at least 6 elderly victims who had given Jessica amounts ranging from $5,000 to $30,000. In each case, Jessica had promised to repay the money within months, but had instead disappeared from their lives once she had what she wanted. The most disturbing case, Amanda said, involved a 72-year-old widower named Harold Peterson. Jessica convinced him that she was starting a business and needed an investor. She visited him weekly, bringing groceries, helping with yard work, making him feel like family. She extracted $45,000 from him over 6 months. When he finally asked for updates on his investment, she told him he had been confused and had never given her any money. Mr. Peterson had tried to pursue legal action, but Jessica had been careful to get cash payments and had manipulated him into believing he might be experiencing memory problems. By the time he realized what had happened, Jessica had moved on to her next victim. Mrs. Collins, Amanda said, when I saw that she had married into your family, I was terrified for you. Jessica doesn't just steal money. She destroys people psychologically. She makes them doubt their own memories, their own judgment, their own worth. She's a predator of the worst kind. I thanked Amanda for her courage in calling me and assured her that Jessica had chosen her final victim. But her information gave me something even more valuable than evidence. It gave me insight into Jessica's psychological profile and methods. That afternoon, I met with Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a forensic psychologist who had consulted on several of my most complex cases. I shared Amanda's information and asked Dr. Rodriguez to help me understand exactly what I was dealing with. "Hannah," Dr. Rodriguez said after reviewing all the evidence we had compiled, "what you're describing is a textbook case of what we call predatory psychological manipulation. Jessica isn't just greedy. She's a sophisticated psychological predator who has perfected techniques for breaking down elderly individuals' resistance and self-confidence." Dr. Rodriguez explained that Jessica's pattern of behavior indicated a personality disorder that made her incapable of genuine empathy or remorse. She viewed elderly people not as human beings deserving of respect, but as resources to be exploited. Her marriage to David wasn't motivated by love. It was simply her most ambitious attempt yet to access substantial assets through psychological manipulation. "The toast at the wedding wasn't just arrogance," Dr. Rodriguez continued. "It was a psychological dominance display. She was marking her territory, asserting her perceived superiority, and attempting to establish psychological control over you in front of witnesses. It's a classic predator behavior." But Dr. Rodriguez also gave me something crucial: a psychological profile that would allow me to predict Jessica's behavior and use her own personality traits against her. "Jessica's confidence is both her greatest strength and her fatal weakness," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "She's so convinced of her own superiority that she doesn't properly assess the capabilities of her targets. She sees age as weakness, retirement as vulnerability, kindness as stupidity. She literally cannot conceive that someone like you might be more intelligent, more resourceful, and more dangerous than she is." That evening, I received another call that proved the universe sometimes provides exactly the allies you need at precisely the right moment. The caller was Margaret Stevens, a 78-year-old retired federal judge who had heard about my situation through the legal community's informal network. "Hannah, dear," Judge Stevens said in her commanding voice, "I understand you're dealing with a family predator situation. I want you to know that you have resources available that extend far beyond what you might realize." Judge Stevens explained that she had been working with a network of retired legal professionals who had created an informal support system for elderly individuals facing exactly the kind of exploitation I was experiencing. The network included retired judges, prosecutors, FBI agents, and attorneys who had decided to use their post-retirement years to protect vulnerable elderly individuals from predators. "We call ourselves the Silver Shield," she said, with evident pride. "And we've been waiting for a case like yours, where the victim has the resources and expertise to fight back properly and set a precedent that will protect others." Judge Stevens had reviewed my case file through James Morrison and was impressed with the thoroughness of my documentation. But she offered something I hadn't even considered: the possibility of making my case a test case that would establish new legal precedents for protecting elderly individuals from family-based financial predators. "Hannah, if you're willing, we can make your case into a landmark example of how to properly investigate, document, and prosecute this type of elder abuse. Your legal background and the quality of evidence you've assembled could help us protect thousands of other elderly individuals from similar predators." The idea was intriguing, but Judge Stevens wasn't finished. "We've also been monitoring Jessica's background through our network," she continued. "We have evidence that she's been running similar schemes in 3 other states over the past 5 years. She's not just a local predator, she's part of a larger pattern of interstate elder abuse that falls under federal jurisdiction." The implications were staggering. Jessica hadn't just targeted me. She had been systematically moving from state to state, targeting elderly individuals, stealing their assets, and then disappearing before law enforcement could build cases against her. Her marriage to David represented her most sophisticated attempt yet to legitimize her access to substantial assets. But now she had made the mistake of targeting someone who had the resources, expertise, and connections to expose her entire operation. That night, I sat in my office surrounded by evidence that painted a picture of a predator who had destroyed multiple lives in pursuit of easy money. But I also had something Jessica had never faced before: a coordinated network of legal professionals who were determined to stop her permanently. Leave a like if you also believe that predators who target elderly people deserve the full weight of justice. Because what I discovered next would prove that Jessica's arrogance had led her to make mistakes that would destroy not just her immediate plans, but her entire criminal operation. The honeymoon would end in 5 days. When Jessica returned expecting to find a confused old woman ready to be manipulated, she would instead face a coordinated legal assault that would expose every crime she had ever committed and ensure she would never be able to target another elderly person again. She thought she was playing games with a lonely old woman. Instead, she had declared war on a network of the most experienced legal minds in the country, all united by a determination to protect people like me from predators like her. On the 7th day of their honeymoon, I discovered something that shattered whatever remained of my maternal illusions about David's innocence in this scheme. The revelation came through a source I had never expected: Jessica's own mother, Patricia Webb. Mrs. Webb called me at 8 in the morning, her voice trembling with what I initially thought was excitement about the wedding, but her first words made my stomach drop. "Mrs. Collins, I'm calling because I can't sleep at night, knowing what my daughter is planning to do to you. I raised Jessica, but I don't recognize the person she's become, and I can't be silent anymore." What Patricia Webb revealed over the next 2 hours destroyed any hope I had that David was simply a naive victim of Jessica's manipulation. The truth was far more disturbing. This had been a carefully planned conspiracy from the very beginning, and my son had been an active and willing participant every step of the way. "Mrs. Collins," Patricia said, her voice breaking, "I need you to understand that Jessica has been planning this for over a year. She researched your family, your financial situation, your legal background, everything. She knew exactly who you were before she ever met David." Patricia explained that Jessica had specifically targeted David after learning about my legal career and retirement assets through public records and social media research. She had identified me as what she called a high-value target, an elderly woman with substantial assets, living alone, with an adult child who might be susceptible to manipulation. But Mrs. Collins, David wasn't manipulated. He was a willing partner from the beginning. They spent months planning how to gain access to your assets. I heard them discussing strategies, timelines, legal procedures. David was the one who suggested they could have you declared incompetent if you resisted their plans. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Jessica could have done alone. My own son, the child I had raised with every sacrifice and opportunity I could provide, had been actively planning to destroy my independence and steal my life's work. Patricia had documentation that proved the conspiracy went back to the earliest days of their relationship. She showed me text messages between Jessica and David from 8 months ago, where they discussed the timeline for gaining full access to Mom's assets and the best legal strategies for elderly asset transfer. In one particularly damning exchange, David had written, "Mom trusts me completely. She'll sign anything I ask her to sign. The key is making her think she's helping us build our future together." Jessica had responded, "Perfect. Once we have power of attorney, we can liquidate everything within 6 months. She'll be in assisted living before she knows what happened and will have enough money to disappear permanently." The coldness of their planning was breathtaking, but Patricia had saved the most devastating revelation for last. "Mrs. Collins, I need to tell you about the other families they've targeted. You're not their first victim. You're just their most ambitious target." Patricia revealed that Jessica and David had been running a smaller-scale version of this scheme for the past 18 months, targeting elderly individuals in David's professional network. As a sales manager for a medical supply company, David had access to information about healthcare facilities and their elderly clients. They had identified lonely elderly individuals who were recently widowed or dealing with health issues, and David would approach them as a concerned professional, offering help with insurance claims or equipment purchases. Once he established trust, Jessica would be introduced as his fiancée, and together they would gradually extract money through various emergency situations and investment opportunities. "They've stolen over $200,000 from at least 8 different elderly people," Patricia said, her voice filled with shame and anger. "Each time they would disappear before their victims could pursue legal action. David would change jobs, Jessica would move to a new apartment, and they'd start fresh in a different area. But their marriage plan represented something far more sophisticated and permanent. By gaining legal access to my assets through family relationships and power of attorney, they could steal significantly more money while maintaining a veneer of legitimacy. Patricia had tried to confront Jessica about the pattern of elderly exploitation, but Jessica had laughed and called her too stupid to understand business opportunities. She had bragged about how easy it was to manipulate senile old people who were grateful for any attention from younger people. Mrs. Collins, Patricia continued, Jessica has a file on you that's over 50 pages long. She knows your financial history, your legal cases, your retirement benefits, your health records, everything. She studied you like a predator studies prey, and she taught David how to manipulate your emotions and trust. The file Patricia described contained detailed psychological profiles of my personality traits, emotional vulnerabilities, and decision-making patterns. Jessica had researched my most significant legal cases, identified my professional relationships, and even analyzed my social media posts for insights into my psychological state and family dynamics. But the most disturbing element of their plan was the timeline for my elimination from my own life. According to documents Patricia had found, they intended to have me declared incompetent within 3 months of their return from the honeymoon, liquidate my major assets within 6 months, and have me permanently institutionalized within a year. Jessica had already researched assisted living facilities in other states, places where I would be isolated from anyone who might advocate for me or investigate their actions. The plan was to move me far enough away that my professional contacts and neighbors couldn't interfere with their asset liquidation. They talked about you like you were already dead, Patricia said, crying now. Jessica would joke about how you were too old and confused to understand what was happening, and how grateful you should be that someone was willing to take care of your financial burdens. Patricia had brought copies of everything: text messages, financial documents, research files, correspondence with assisted living facilities, even recordings of conversations where Jessica and David discussed their plans in detail. Mrs. Collins, I know this is my daughter, and I should protect her, but what she's planning to do to you is evil. You don't deserve this. No one deserves this. And I can't live with myself if I don't give you the information you need to protect yourself. That afternoon, I met with my legal team to review Patricia's evidence. The documentation was more comprehensive than anything we had been able to compile independently. It proved not only criminal conspiracy and attempted fraud, but also a pattern of elderly abuse that crossed state lines and involved multiple federal crimes. Hannah, James Morrison said, studying the evidence, this isn't just about protecting your assets anymore. We have documentation of a systematic criminal enterprise that has victimized dozens of elderly individuals. This is a federal case. Sarah Chen had already contacted the FBI's Elder Abuse Unit, and they were interested in using our case as the foundation for a comprehensive investigation into Jessica and David's criminal network. But I had something more immediate in mind. Patricia's information had given me insight into their psychological vulnerabilities and strategic mistakes. I now knew exactly how they planned to attack me, which meant I could prepare a defense that would not only protect me, but would trap them in their own scheme. I want to show them what happens when predators target someone who understands exactly how they operate, I told my team. They've spent months planning my destruction. Now they're going to discover what it feels like to have their own tactics used against them. The honeymoon would end in 3 days. When Jessica and David returned, expecting to find a confused old woman ready to be manipulated into signing away her independence, they would instead walk into a legal trap that would expose their entire criminal operation and ensure they spent years in federal prison. They thought they were playing games with a vulnerable elderly woman. Instead, they had declared war on someone who now had complete knowledge of their methods, their psychology, their criminal history, and their specific plans for my destruction. Jessica's arrogant toast had awakened something in me that she couldn't have imagined in her worst nightmares. A sophisticated legal predator who specialized in destroying people exactly like her. On the 9th day of their honeymoon, while Jessica and David were probably making their final preparations to return home and begin what they thought would be my systematic destruction, I was putting the finishing touches on a legal trap so comprehensive and elegant that it would have made Machiavelli proud. The conference room at Morrison & Associates had been transformed into what Sarah Chen called a war room. The walls were covered with timelines, financial charts, legal documents, and photographs that told the complete story of Jessica and David's criminal enterprise. But more importantly, they outlined a counterattack strategy that would use their own methods and psychology against them. "Hannah," Detective Walsh said, reviewing our final preparations, "in 25 years of law enforcement, I've never seen a more thorough documentation of criminal intent. But what makes this case special is that we're not just reacting to their crimes. We're using their own plan to trap them. The beauty of our strategy lay in its simplicity. Instead of trying to prevent their attack on me, we were going to let them begin their scheme exactly as they had planned, while documenting every single criminal action they took. They would incriminate themselves completely while thinking they were successfully victimizing me." Judge Stevens had worked with federal prosecutors to establish what she called controlled entrapment protocols. With court approval, I would be wearing recording devices, and my house would be equipped with hidden cameras that would capture every moment of their attempted fraud and elder abuse. "The key," Dr. Rodriguez explained, "is understanding that Jessica's arrogance will make her overconfident. She's so convinced that elderly people are easy targets that she won't suspect sophisticated resistance. She'll perform her manipulation techniques exactly as she's done with previous victims, giving us perfect evidence of her criminal methods." But we weren't just planning to catch them in the act. We were preparing to destroy their entire criminal network. Michael Torres had traced their financial crimes across 3 states and identified at least 15 elderly victims who had been systematically robbed by Jessica and David's operation. The FBI's Elder Abuse Unit was coordinating with state attorneys general to file charges that would ensure federal prosecution and maximum sentences. "What they don't understand," Michael explained, "is that their pattern of interstate elderly abuse makes this a federal racketeering case. We're not just talking about fraud charges. We're looking at organized criminal enterprise violations that carry 20-year sentences." Amanda Richardson had provided contact information for Jessica's previous employers, and we had discovered a criminal pattern that went back over 5 years. Jessica hadn't just been fired from Meridian Technologies. She had been terminated from 4 different companies for stealing client information to target elderly individuals. Each company had documented evidence of Jessica's systematic research into elderly clients' financial situations, but none had pursued criminal charges because they wanted to avoid negative publicity. Now, however, they were eager to cooperate with federal investigators to ensure Jessica could never target vulnerable elderly people again. But the most satisfying element of our trap was something I had designed specifically to exploit Jessica's psychological weaknesses and David's guilt over betraying his own mother. Patricia Webb had agreed to play a crucial role in our strategy. She would return to town the day before Jessica and David arrived, and she would visit me to apologize for her daughter's behavior at the wedding. During this visit, which Jessica and David would undoubtedly hear about, Patricia would mention that I had seemed confused and forgetful during our conversation, and that she was concerned about my mental state. This false information would make Jessica overconfident about my vulnerability and would accelerate their timeline for having me declared incompetent. The more aggressively they moved, the more evidence we would capture of their criminal intent. Jessica's personality profile indicates that she becomes reckless when she thinks victory is assured, Dr. Rodriguez had explained. If she believes you're already showing signs of mental decline, she'll abandon caution and move quickly to secure control of your assets. Meanwhile, I had taken steps to ensure that every aspect of their plan would fail spectacularly while providing us with maximum evidence of their criminal actions. I had transferred my major assets into an irrevocable trust managed by Morrison & Associates, making it impossible for anyone to access them through power of attorney or competency challenges. But I had left smaller accounts and the house deed in a way that would make Jessica think she could still access them, encouraging her to attempt fraud that we could document. I had also arranged for Dr. Hayes, the psychiatrist David had contacted about competency evaluations, to be prepared with a comprehensive mental assessment that would not only prove my complete mental competence, but would also document any attempts to manipulate the evaluation process. "The most beautiful part of this strategy," Sarah said, admiring our preparation, "is that every move they make according to their plan will provide us with evidence of criminal conspiracy. They literally cannot succeed without incriminating themselves completely." But I had saved the most devastating surprise for last. Through Judge Stevens' network, I had discovered that Jessica was wanted for questioning in connection with the suspicious death of an elderly man in Arizona. Harold Peterson, the 72-year-old widower Amanda Richardson had mentioned, had died of what appeared to be a heart attack 3 weeks after Jessica had disappeared with his $45,000. However, Mr. Peterson's adult children had requested an investigation when they discovered that he had been giving large amounts of money to a young woman who had subsequently vanished. The Arizona authorities had evidence suggesting that Jessica had been systematically isolating Mr. Peterson from his family and had been present in his home on the day he died. "They're not just looking at her for fraud," Detective Walsh explained. "They're investigating whether she might have been involved in his death. The timing is suspicious, and there are indications that she might have been giving him medications that could have triggered his heart condition." The possibility that Jessica might be responsible for an elderly man's death added a level of urgency to our case that transformed it from financial crime to potential homicide investigation. On the 10th day of their honeymoon, I received confirmation that everything was in place. Federal agents were coordinated with local law enforcement, recording equipment had been installed and tested, financial institutions had been alerted to document any attempts to access my accounts. Medical professionals were prepared to resist any manipulation attempts. Most importantly, I had prepared myself psychologically for what would be the performance of my lifetime. For the next several weeks, I would have to pretend to be the confused, vulnerable elderly woman Jessica expected to find, while actually controlling every aspect of the situation to ensure maximum evidence collection. "Hannah," James said during our final strategy meeting, "I want you to understand what you're about to accomplish. This case won't just protect you. It's going to establish legal precedents that will protect thousands of other elderly individuals from similar predators." That evening, I sat in my living room looking at the house Jessica had so arrogantly claimed as her own. Tomorrow, she and David would return from their honeymoon, expecting to begin the systematic destruction of my independence and the theft of my life's work. Instead, they would walk into the most comprehensive legal trap ever constructed for elderly abuse predators. Every word they spoke, every document they presented, every manipulation technique they employed would be recorded and documented for federal prosecutors. If you believe that people who prey on elderly family members deserve to face the full consequences of their actions, subscribe and share this story. Because what happened when Jessica walked through my door and saw her suitcase waiting will show you exactly how justice should be served to predators who target the most vulnerable members of our society. The honeymoon was over. The real education was about to begin. The morning of their return, I woke up at 5:30 and spent 2 hours preparing for what would be the most important performance of my life. In my bathroom mirror, I practiced the subtle signs of confusion and vulnerability that Jessica would expect to see. The slight tremor in my hands, the hesitant speech patterns, the moments of apparent forgetfulness that would make her overconfident about her ability to manipulate me. But beneath this carefully constructed facade, I was sharper and more focused than I had been in years. Every fiber of my being was concentrated on one goal: giving Jessica and David enough rope to hang themselves while documenting every criminal action they took. At 9 o'clock, Patricia Webb arrived for her scheduled visit, playing her role perfectly. She embraced me with apparent concern and spoke loudly, as if I might have hearing problems. "Hannah, dear, I wanted to apologize again for Jessica's behavior at the wedding. That toast was so inappropriate, and I've been worried about you ever since." I responded with just the right amount of confusion and gratitude, allowing my voice to waver slightly as I thanked her for her concern. Patricia mentioned that she had spoken with Jessica the night before, and that Jessica was eager to come home and help take care of family matters. "She's so excited to be part of the family," Patricia said with perfectly acted enthusiasm. "She mentioned that you might need some assistance with financial matters and household management. She wants to be helpful." I played my part beautifully, expressing appreciation for Jessica's concern and admitting to some confusion about managing my finances since retirement. Patricia assured me that Jessica was very good with money and would be able to help me organize everything properly. After Patricia left, Detective Walsh confirmed through her concealed communication device that our conversation had been perfectly recorded. The audio would clearly demonstrate Patricia's knowledge of Jessica's intentions and would establish the conspiracy timeline. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I heard the sound of David's car in the driveway. Through my living room window, I watched as he and Jessica got out, both looking tanned and relaxed from their European honeymoon. Jessica was carrying several shopping bags, undoubtedly full of items she had purchased, with the expectation of soon having unlimited access to my money. I had positioned myself in my favorite armchair, surrounded by pill bottles, financial documents, and newspapers. The perfect picture of an elderly woman struggling to manage her affairs. Hidden cameras captured every angle of the room, and recording devices would document every word of the conversation about to take place. David entered first, calling out cheerfully, "Mom, we're home! How are you feeling?" I stood up slowly, allowing myself to appear slightly unsteady, and embraced him with what seemed like desperate gratitude. "David, sweetheart, I'm so glad you're back. I've been having such a difficult time managing everything alone." Jessica followed, her smile bright and predatory as she surveyed the room. I noticed how her eyes immediately went to the financial documents scattered on my coffee table, assessing what information she could gather. "Hannah, you look tired," Jessica said with false concern. "The house seems so big for you to manage alone. Are you sure you're taking care of yourself properly?" I played into her expectations perfectly, admitting to feeling overwhelmed by household maintenance and expressing confusion about some of my financial statements. Jessica's eyes lit up with barely concealed excitement as she offered to help organize everything for me. "You know, Hannah, David and I were talking during our honeymoon about how we could be more helpful to you. This house is so large, and managing finances can be so complicated. Maybe we could take some of that burden off your shoulders." David joined the conversation, his voice filled with what seemed like genuine concern, but which I now recognized as calculated manipulation. "Mom, Jessica is really good with financial planning. She could help you organize your accounts and make sure everything is properly managed." I expressed gratitude for their offer while carefully demonstrating just enough mental confusion to make them think their plan was working. I asked questions about bank procedures, admitted to forgetting important appointments, and mentioned being worried about making mistakes with money. Jessica moved closer, her voice taking on the soothing tone I recognized from Dr. Rodriguez's description of predatory manipulation techniques. "Hannah, you don't need to worry about anything anymore. We're family now, and family takes care of each other. Why don't you let us handle the complicated financial matters so you can focus on enjoying your retirement?" For the next hour, I watched Jessica employ every manipulation technique I had studied in preparation for this moment. She alternated between expressing concern for my well-being and subtly undermining my confidence in my own abilities. She asked detailed questions about my bank accounts, investment portfolios, and insurance policies, all while maintaining the pretense of wanting to help protect me from making costly mistakes. David's role was to provide emotional pressure, reminding me of how much I had sacrificed for his happiness, and suggesting that allowing them to manage my finances would be the best way to ensure the family's security for the future. But the most damning moment came when Jessica thought I had left the room to make tea. I had actually stopped just outside the doorway, where hidden microphones captured every word of their conversation. "She's worse than I expected," Jessica whispered to David. "Did you see how confused she was about those bank statements? We can probably move faster than we planned." David's response eliminated any remaining doubt about his willing participation in their scheme. "I know. She seems really disoriented. Mom was always so sharp, but she's clearly declining. We should contact Dr. Hayes tomorrow about scheduling that competency evaluation." Jessica's voice took on the cold, calculating tone I had heard described by her previous victims. "Perfect. And I noticed she has those investment statements just sitting out on the table. Once we have power of attorney, we can liquidate those accounts immediately. I'm thinking we should also contact that assisted living place in Nevada. The sooner we can get her settled somewhere safe, the better." When I returned with tea, they immediately shifted back to their caring, concerned personas. but I had everything I needed. In just one conversation, they had demonstrated clear criminal conspiracy, admitted to planning to have me declared incompetent against my will, discussed liquidating my assets without my consent, and revealed their intention to institutionalize me in another state where I would be isolated from anyone who might protect me. As the afternoon progressed, Jessica became increasingly aggressive in her attempts to gain access to my financial information. She suggested that we visit my bank together, just to make sure everything is properly organized. She offered to help me update my will to reflect my new family circumstances. She even hinted that I should consider adding her name to my bank accounts for emergency access. Each suggestion was presented with caring concern, but the hidden cameras captured the predatory gleam in her eyes and the calculating way she assessed my responses to determine how much resistance I might offer to her plans. By evening, I was exhausted from maintaining my performance, but exhilarated by how completely Jessica and David had incriminated themselves. They had provided enough evidence in one afternoon to support multiple federal charges, and they had no idea that every moment had been recorded. As they prepared to leave for their new apartment, Jessica made one final move that demonstrated the true scope of their arrogance. "Hannah," she said, embracing me with false affection, "I want you to know that you don't have to worry about anything anymore. David and I are going to take care of everything. You just focus on staying healthy and let us handle all the complicated adult responsibilities." The condescending tone of her voice made my blood boil, but I maintained my confused, grateful persona and thanked her for being such a wonderful addition to our family. After they left, Detective Walsh emerged from her concealment position and confirmed that we had captured everything perfectly. "Hannah, that was Academy Award-level acting. They have no idea what just happened to them." That evening, I sat in my office reviewing the day's recordings with my legal team. Every federal prosecutor who heard the audio was amazed by how completely Jessica and David had incriminated themselves. "They didn't just admit to planning fraud," Sarah observed. "They provided detailed evidence of conspiracy, elder abuse, attempted financial exploitation, and interstate criminal enterprise operations. This is a prosecutor's dream case." Turn on notification bells if you want to see how predators react when they discover their victims are actually predators who are far more dangerous than they ever imagined. Because tomorrow, Jessica would return to begin what she thought would be the systematic destruction of my independence. Instead, she would walk into the most devastating legal ambush in elder abuse prosecution history. The trap was set. The evidence was recorded. The federal prosecutors were ready. Now it was time to show Jessica and David what happened when professional predators targeted someone who had spent 40 years destroying people exactly like them. The next morning, Jessica arrived at my house at exactly 9 o'clock, carrying a briefcase and wearing what I recognized as her professional manipulation outfit, a conservative dress designed to make her appear trustworthy and competent. She had no idea that federal agents were positioned around my neighborhood, documenting her every move as part of an active criminal investigation. "Good morning, Hannah," she said, with that practiced smile I had come to despise. "I brought some paperwork that might help us organize your financial situation better. I thought we could go through everything together and make sure you're properly protected." I played my role perfectly, expressing gratitude for her concern while allowing her to guide me to my dining room table, where she spread out documents that made my legal training immediately recognize the scope of her criminal intentions. The papers she had prepared were nothing short of a comprehensive asset seizure plan disguised as helpful financial organization. There were power of attorney forms that would give her complete control over my finances, property transfer documents that would add her name to my house deed, and bank authorization forms that would allow her to access all my accounts without my presence. But the most sinister document was one I had seen in dozens of elder abuse cases during my legal career, a preliminary mental competency questionnaire designed to establish documentation of cognitive decline that could later be used to support involuntary commitment proceedings. "Hannah, these forms will just make everything easier for you," Jessica explained with false concern. "You won't have to worry about managing complicated financial decisions anymore. I'll handle everything, and you can focus on enjoying your retirement." As she spoke, I noticed how she had positioned the documents to obscure the most important legal language, making it difficult for me to read the full implications of what I would be signing. This was clearly a practice technique she had used with previous victims. "The power of attorney is just for emergencies," she lied smoothly. "It won't change anything about your daily life, but it will mean that if you ever have health problems or memory issues, David and I can make sure your bills are paid and your assets are protected." I pretended to read the documents with confusion, asking questions that allowed Jessica to reveal more of her criminal intentions. When I expressed concern about giving up control of my finances, she employed the psychological manipulation techniques Dr. Rodriguez had described. "Hannah, I understand your worry, but you need to think about what's best for your future security. You're 72 years old, and managing money becomes more difficult as we age. Wouldn't you rather have family members you trust handling these complicated matters than risk making costly mistakes?" The age manipulation was textbook predatory behavior, using my chronological age to suggest mental incapacity and creating pressure to surrender financial control for my own protection. Every word was being recorded for federal prosecutors, but Jessica had saved her most aggressive move for when she thought she had softened my resistance sufficiently. "There's something else we need to discuss," she said, pulling out a folder I hadn't seen before. "David and I have been researching some wonderful assisted living communities that might be perfect for you. Places where you could have social activities, professional care, and freedom from the burden of maintaining such a large house." The folder contained brochures for assisted living facilities in Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico, all states far enough from my home to isolate me from friends, neighbors, and professional contacts who might question their actions or advocate for my rights. "This place in Nevada looks particularly nice," Jessica continued, showing me glossy photographs of what looked more like a prison than a retirement community. "They specialize in residents who need assistance with daily decision-making and financial management. You could be there within a few weeks if we act quickly." I felt a chill of recognition as I realized this was exactly the same facility she had researched for previous victims. This wasn't just theft. It was a systematic process for making elderly individuals disappear from their own lives while their assets were liquidated by predators. "The best part," Jessica said with what she clearly thought was reassurance, "is that once you're settled there, you won't have to worry about any of these complicated financial matters anymore. David and I will handle everything, and you can just focus on enjoying your golden years." I played along with apparent gratitude, but internally I was documenting every criminal statement she made. She had just admitted to planning to institutionalize me against my will, isolate me from my support network, and assume complete control of my assets, all classic elements of elder abuse that would result in federal charges. The afternoon brought an even more disturbing revelation when David arrived with Dr. Marcus Webb, a man Jessica introduced as a specialist in geriatric mental health assessment. I immediately recognized Dr. Webb's credentials as fraudulent. His supposed medical degree was from a diploma mill, and his specialization in elderly mental competency was actually a cover for a criminal operation that provided fake psychological evaluations to support involuntary commitment proceedings. "Mrs. Collins," Dr. Webb said with practiced authority, "your family has expressed some concern about your recent memory issues and decision-making difficulties. I'd like to conduct a brief assessment to ensure you're receiving appropriate care." The assessment was clearly designed to establish documentation of mental incompetence regardless of my actual cognitive state. Dr. Webb asked leading questions intended to confuse me, presented cognitive tests with deliberately misleading instructions, and made notes that characterized my normal responses as signs of mental decline. "I noticed some concerning indicators," he announced after less than 30 minutes of interaction. "There are signs of confusion, memory lapses, and difficulty with complex decision-making that suggest Mrs. Collins might benefit from professional care and assistance with financial management." Jessica and David exchanged satisfied glances, clearly believing their plan was proceeding perfectly. They had no idea that Dr. Webb's fraudulent credentials had been identified weeks ago, and that federal investigators were building a case against the entire criminal network that included fake medical professionals who provided false competency evaluations for elder abuse schemes. But the most damaging evidence came when Jessica thought I had become confused and disoriented by Dr. Webb's manipulative assessment techniques. "David," she said in what she thought was a whisper, "she's worse than we expected. We should move her to Nevada within the week. The sooner we get her settled and get full access to her accounts, the better." David's response provided the final piece of evidence prosecutors needed to prove their conspiracy extended to kidnapping and interstate transportation of elderly victims for criminal purposes. "I agree. And once she's there, we can sell the house immediately. I already have a realtor lined up who says we can get at least $400,000 for it in this market. They were discussing selling my house and moving me across the country to a fraudulent assisted living facility where I would be held against my will while they liquidated my assets. This wasn't just fraud, it was kidnapping, false imprisonment, and organized criminal enterprise operations that would result in decades of federal prison time. That evening, after Jessica, David, and their fake doctor had left, I met with federal prosecutors who were amazed by the comprehensiveness of evidence we had gathered. Mrs. Collins, Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Martinez said, "In 20 years of prosecuting elder abuse cases, I've never seen such complete documentation of criminal conspiracy. They've provided enough evidence for charges that will ensure they spend the rest of their lives in federal prison." The investigation had also uncovered the full scope of their criminal network. Dr. Webb was part of an interstate operation that provided fraudulent medical evaluations for elder abuse schemes across multiple states. The Nevada Assisted Living Facility was actually a criminal enterprise that held elderly victims while their assets were stolen. Jessica and David were part of a larger organization that had systematically robbed hundreds of elderly individuals across the western United States. "But Mrs. Collins," Attorney Martinez continued, "we need you to continue your performance for just a few more days. Tomorrow, they're going to try to execute their final phase, getting you to sign the documents that would give them complete control of your assets and legal authority to move you to Nevada." I assured her that I was ready to see this through to the end. After 40 years of protecting families from predators exactly like Jessica and David, I was going to ensure that their criminal careers ended with the most comprehensive elder abuse prosecution in federal history. Tomorrow, Jessica would arrive expecting to complete what she thought was the successful theft of my life's work and the destruction of my independence. Instead, she would walk into a federal law enforcement operation that would expose her entire criminal network and ensure that she would never be able to harm another elderly person again. The trap was ready. The evidence was overwhelming. The federal agents were in position. Now it was time to show Jessica and David what justice looked like when delivered by someone who understood their methods better than they understood them themselves. Jessica arrived at my house on Thursday morning, carrying what she clearly believed would be the final documents needed to complete my financial destruction. She was accompanied by David and a man she introduced as Mr. Peterson, a notary who will help us make everything official. What Jessica didn't know was that Mr. Peterson was actually Agent Robert Chen from the FBI's Elder Abuse Unit, and that every word she spoke was being recorded not just for my protection, but as evidence in what had become the largest elder abuse prosecution in federal history. "Hannah, we're here to finalize everything so you don't have to worry about complicated financial matters anymore," Jessica said with that predatory smile I had learned to recognize. She spread out documents across my dining room table with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. I played my role perfectly, appearing grateful but confused as Jessica guided me through what she described as simple paperwork that will protect your future security. But my legal training allowed me to recognize exactly what she was actually asking me to sign. Documents that would transfer complete control of my assets to her, authorize my immediate institutionalization, and give her power to sell my property without my consent. "This power of attorney form is just for emergencies," she lied smoothly, pointing to a document that would actually give her immediate and irrevocable control over every aspect of my financial life. "It won't change anything about your daily routine, but it will mean David and I can help you if you ever have health problems or memory issues." Agent Chen, maintaining his cover as a notary, asked questions that allowed Jessica to provide even more incriminating evidence. Ms. Webb, can you explain to Mrs. Collins what authority this power of attorney would give you? Jessica's response was everything federal prosecutors needed to prove criminal conspiracy and elder abuse. Well, it would allow me to manage Hannah's bank accounts, make investment decisions, pay her bills, and handle any property transactions that might be necessary for her care. Basically, I would be able to take care of all the complicated financial responsibilities that are becoming too difficult for her to manage alone. She had just admitted, on federal recording equipment, to planning to assume complete control of my finances without my informed consent, based on false claims about my mental competency. But Jessica wasn't finished incriminating herself. The most important thing, she continued, is that this will allow us to make care decisions for Hannah if her condition deteriorates further. We've already researched some excellent facilities that specialize in elderly residents who need assistance with daily decision-making. Agent Chen pressed for more details, and Jessica eagerly provided them. There's a wonderful place in Nevada that we've been in contact with. They have immediate availability, and they're experienced with residents who need transitional support while their families handle complex financial arrangements. Hannah could be settled there within a week if necessary. I felt a chill as I realized she was describing the same fraudulent assisted living facility where previous victims had been held while their assets were liquidated. This wasn't just theft. It was a systematic process for making elderly individuals disappear from their own lives. David's contribution to the conversation eliminated any possibility that he could claim to be an innocent victim of Jessica's manipulation. Mom, I know this seems overwhelming, but Jessica has really thought through what's best for your future security. The Nevada facility has excellent reviews, and it would give you access to professional care while we handle the burden of managing your financial affairs. My own son was actively participating in planning my kidnapping and imprisonment. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Jessica could have done alone, but it also strengthened my resolve to see this through to its devastating conclusion. The moment of truth came when Jessica placed the final document in front of me, a property transfer form that would add her name to my house deed with right of survivorship, effectively giving her immediate ownership of my home. This is just a precautionary measure, she said, with what she clearly thought was reassurance. It ensures that if anything happens to you, the house will stay in the family rather than getting tied up in complicated legal processes. She was asking me to sign away my home to someone who had been planning to institutionalize me and steal everything I owned. The audacity was breathtaking, but it was also the final piece of evidence prosecutors needed to prove grand theft and conspiracy charges. I pretended to hesitate, expressing concern about giving up ownership of my home. Jessica's response revealed the true depth of her psychological manipulation techniques. Hannah, you need to think about what's realistic for your future. You're 72 years old, and this house is becoming too much for you to manage. Wouldn't it be better to know that it's protected and will be properly cared for rather than risk having problems you can't handle? She was using my age as a weapon against me, suggesting that chronological age automatically meant mental incapacity and inability to manage my own affairs. Every word was classic elder abuse manipulation that would be used as evidence in her prosecution. But then Jessica made the mistake that would ensure her conviction on the most serious charges possible. Thinking I was sufficiently confused and intimidated, she leaned forward and spoke in what she thought was a reassuring tone, but which actually contained a direct threat. Hannah, I need you to understand that this is what's best for everyone. David and I have already made arrangements for your care, and we're prepared to move forward with or without your cooperation. It would be much easier for you if you simply trust us to handle everything properly. Agent Chen immediately recognized this as a threat of involuntary commitment and asset seizure, and he guided Jessica to provide even more incriminating details. Ms. Webb, what do you mean by arrangements for Mrs. Collins' care? Jessica's response was everything prosecutors needed to add kidnapping and false imprisonment charges to her indictment. We've already spoken with the Nevada facility about immediate placement if Hannah's condition deteriorates further. We have medical documentation supporting the need for professional care, and we're prepared to take whatever steps are necessary to ensure her safety and security. she had just admitted to planning to have me forcibly institutionalized based on fraudulent medical evaluations, transported across state lines against my will, and held in a criminal facility while she stole my assets. At that moment, I made the decision that this charade had gone far enough. I looked directly at Jessica with complete clarity and said in my strongest, most authoritative voice, "Jessica, I want you to know that I am not confused, I am not incompetent, and I am certainly not going to sign documents that would allow you to steal everything I have worked for." The change in Jessica's expression was immediate and terrifying. The mask of caring concern disappeared, replaced by cold rage and predatory calculation. "You senile old bitch," she snarled, her true personality finally emerging. "Do you have any idea what we've invested in this? You're going to sign those papers whether you want to or not, and you're going to Nevada whether you like it or not." David tried to calm her down, but Jessica was beyond rational control. "Shut up, David. She's been playing games with us, pretending to be confused. But it doesn't matter now. We have the medical evaluation, we have the legal documentation, and we have arrangements in place. She's going to Nevada tomorrow, and there's nothing she can do about it." Agent Chen gave the signal, and within seconds, federal agents burst through my front door with weapons drawn. "FBI! Everyone on the ground! Now!" Jessica's face went white as she realized what had happened. "This is impossible. She's just a confused old woman. How could she—" "Jessica Webb," Agent Chen said as he placed her in handcuffs, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit elder abuse, interstate kidnapping, financial fraud, and operating a criminal enterprise. You have the right to remain silent. Share this story if you believe that predators who target elderly family members deserve to face the full weight of federal justice. Because what happened next would prove that underestimating someone because of their age is the most dangerous mistake a criminal can make." The trap had been sprung. The evidence was overwhelming. The criminal network was exposed. Now Jessica and David were about to discover what it felt like to be the helpless victims of a system more powerful and ruthless than anything they had ever imagined. The aftermath of Jessica and David's arrest was more devastating than even I had anticipated. As federal agents led them away in handcuffs, Jessica was screaming threats and obscenities that revealed the true depths of her psychological instability, while David looked stunned and kept repeating, "Mom, how could you do this to your own son?" That question would have broken my heart just weeks ago. Now, after discovering the full scope of their conspiracy to destroy my independence and steal my life's work, I felt only cold satisfaction as I watched them face the consequences of their criminal choices. But the real devastation was just beginning. Within hours of their arrest, Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Martinez had activated what she called the largest coordinated elder abuse takedown in federal history. Using evidence from Jessica and David's case as the foundation, FBI agents simultaneously raided locations across 5 states, arresting members of the criminal network that had been systematically robbing elderly individuals for over 3 years. The fake Dr. Webb was arrested at his Phoenix office, where agents found files on over 60 elderly individuals who had been subjected to fraudulent mental competency evaluations. The Nevada Assisted Living Facility was shut down, and its operators were charged with operating a criminal enterprise designed to imprison elderly victims while their assets were liquidated. But the most shocking revelations came from Jessica's own records. FBI forensic accountants discovered that Jessica had maintained detailed files on what she called her target profiles, comprehensive dossiers on elderly individuals she had researched as potential victims. My file was over 80 pages long and contained everything from my financial statements to psychological analysis of my emotional vulnerabilities and manipulation susceptibilities. "Mrs. Collins," Agent Martinez explained during our debriefing, "Jessica had been planning your victimization for over 18 months. She didn't meet your son by accident. She specifically targeted him because our investigation revealed you as a high-value elderly target with substantial assets and apparent social isolation." The file contained transcripts of conversations Jessica had secretly recorded with David, documenting how she had manipulated him into betraying his own mother. In one particularly damning recording from 6 months ago, Jessica could be heard coaching David on emotional manipulation techniques that would make me more susceptible to their financial exploitation. "Remember, David," Jessica's voice said on the recording, "your mother's greatest weakness is her love for you. If you make her believe that helping us financially is the same as helping you build a secure future, she'll do anything we ask." Elderly people are desperate to feel needed and relevant to their families. But David's responses on those recordings eliminated any possibility that he could claim to be a victim rather than a willing conspirator. "I understand. And if we can get power of attorney, we can liquidate her investments before she realizes what's happening. She trusts me completely, so she won't question anything I ask her to sign." Listening to my own son discuss strategies for stealing my life savings while destroying my independence was more painful than anything Jessica could have done to me alone. But it also confirmed that I had made the right decision in exposing their entire criminal operation. The federal investigation revealed that Jessica and David's network had victimized over 200 elderly individuals across multiple states, stealing approximately $4 million in assets, while destroying countless lives through forced institutionalization and family manipulation. Each victim's story was heartbreakingly similar to what they had planned for me. Elderly individuals who had been identified through social media research, financial records analysis, and professional networking were systematically targeted by young criminals who presented themselves as caring family members or helpful professionals. The victims were then subjected to psychological manipulation designed to undermine their confidence in their own decision-making abilities, fraudulent medical evaluations that declared them mentally incompetent, and forced institutionalization in facilities that were actually criminal enterprises designed to hold elderly individuals while their assets were stolen. "Mrs. Collins," Agent Martinez continued, "because of your courage in allowing us to document their entire operation, we've been able to locate and rescue 18 elderly individuals who were being held in fraudulent facilities while their assets were liquidated. Your case literally saved lives. But the personal devastation for Jessica and David was only beginning. The federal charges against them were comprehensive and devastating. Jessica faced 47 separate counts, including racketeering, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, interstate kidnapping, mail fraud, wire fraud, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise. Each charge carried potential sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years, meaning Jessica was looking at life in federal prison. David faced 31 counts as a willing conspirator, including charges related to his attempts to forge my signature on loan documents and his active participation in planning my forced institutionalization. Even with potential cooperation with prosecutors, he was facing minimum sentences of 25 years in federal prison. But the most satisfying justice came from the financial destruction their arrest had triggered. Jessica had been living far beyond her means, borrowing money from multiple sources based on promises that she would soon have access to substantial family wealth. When news of her arrest spread, her creditors moved quickly to recover their investments. The apartment she and David had rented was foreclosed within a week. The furniture and luxury items she had purchased in anticipation of accessing my assets were repossessed by creditors. The expensive wedding they had financed through credit cards and loans became a financial disaster that destroyed Jessica's relationships with her own family members who had co-signed for various expenses. Jessica's mother, Patricia, called me yesterday. I told my legal team during a strategy session. She's being sued by creditors for loans she guaranteed, and she's facing bankruptcy because of Jessica's spending. She wanted to apologize again and to thank me for stopping Jessica before she could destroy more lives. But the most devastating consequence for Jessica was psychological rather than financial. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had prepared a comprehensive psychological profile of Jessica for federal sentencing purposes, and her analysis revealed the true depths of Jessica's pathological behavior patterns. Jessica Webb exhibits classic symptoms of malignant narcissism combined with antisocial personality disorder, Dr. Rodriguez explained in her report. She views elderly individuals not as human beings deserving of respect and protection, but as resources to be exploited for personal gain. She is incapable of genuine empathy or remorse, and her criminal behavior represents a systematic pattern of predatory exploitation that will continue indefinitely unless she is permanently removed from society. The psychological evaluation recommended that Jessica be classified as a dangerous predator who should never be allowed contact with vulnerable elderly individuals under any circumstances. David's psychological evaluation was different, but equally damning. David Collins exhibits characteristics of dependent personality disorder that made him susceptible to Jessica's manipulation, but his willingness to betray his own mother for financial gain indicates a fundamental lack of moral development that makes him equally dangerous to elderly family members, Dr. Rodriguez concluded. The federal investigation had also uncovered evidence that Jessica's criminal behavior extended far beyond elder abuse. She was wanted in connection with the suspicious death of Harold Peterson in Arizona, and investigators had found evidence suggesting she might have been involved in at least 3 other unexplained deaths of elderly individuals who had been giving her money. Mrs. Collins, Agent Martinez explained, "We believe Jessica may be responsible for multiple homicides disguised as natural deaths. Your case has opened investigative pathways that could solve several cold cases involving suspicious deaths of elderly individuals who had been financially exploited before they died. The possibility that Jessica might be a serial killer who had been murdering elderly victims to cover her financial crimes added a level of horror to the case that made my blood run cold. If I hadn't had the resources and expertise to expose her criminal operation, I might have become her next victim in the most literal sense." As I sat in my living room that evening, looking at the house Jessica had so arrogantly claimed as her own, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, the pure satisfaction of justice properly served. Jessica and David had thought they were targeting a vulnerable elderly woman who would be easy to manipulate and discard. Instead, they had declared war on someone who possessed the knowledge, resources, and determination to destroy their entire criminal empire and ensure they would spend the rest of their lives paying for their crimes. Remember what I learned through this experience. Age is not weakness, and underestimating someone because of their years is the most dangerous mistake a predator can make. Subscribe if you believe that those who prey on our elderly deserve the full weight of justice. But their story wasn't over yet. The most devastating consequences were still to come, as Jessica and David were about to discover what it felt like to be completely helpless victims of forces beyond their control. 6 months after their arrest, Jessica and David stood in federal court facing the consequences of their criminal choices. What they encountered was a level of legal devastation that neither of them had imagined possible when they first began planning to exploit what they thought was a vulnerable elderly woman. The federal courthouse was packed with victims, law enforcement officials, and media representatives covering what prosecutors were calling the most comprehensive elder abuse prosecution in U.S. history. I sat in the front row, no longer the confused, helpless woman Jessica had expected to manipulate, but the architect of the legal strategy that had destroyed their criminal empire. Jessica entered the courtroom in shackles, looking nothing like the confident predator who had raised that arrogant toast at David's wedding. 6 months in federal custody had stripped away her carefully constructed facade, revealing the hollow, desperate criminal she had always been beneath the surface. Judge Patricia Morrison, no relation to my former law firm, but equally committed to protecting vulnerable elderly individuals, reviewed the charges with the kind of methodical precision that made my legal training appreciate the thoroughness of federal justice. "Jessica Webb," Judge Morrison began, "you are charged with 47 federal crimes including racketeering, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, interstate kidnapping, mail fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise. These charges carry potential sentences totaling over 400 years in federal prison." Jessica's court-appointed attorney had tried to negotiate a plea deal, but federal prosecutors had refused any agreement that didn't include full restitution to all victims and a minimum sentence of life without parole. "Your Honor," Assistant U.S. Attorney Martinez addressed the court, "the defendant's crimes represent a systematic pattern of predatory behavior that has destroyed dozens of lives and stolen millions of dollars from elderly victims across multiple states. She has shown no remorse, no recognition of the harm she has caused, and no indication that she would not continue this pattern of criminal behavior if given the opportunity." The victim impact statements were devastating. 83-year-old Margaret Chen, one of Jessica's previous victims, testified via video link from the assisted living facility where she had been forced to move after Jessica stole her life savings. "She came to my house every week, bringing flowers and helping with groceries," Mrs. Chen said, her voice trembling with emotion. "She made me feel like I had a granddaughter who cared about me. I trusted her with everything, and she destroyed my life. I lost my home, my independence, my dignity, all because I believed someone who pretended to love me." Harold Peterson's adult children testified about their father's suspicious death and the $45,000 Jessica had stolen from him in the months before he died. "Our father was healthy and independent until Jessica entered his life," his daughter Sarah Peterson said. "Within 6 months, she had isolated him from his family, stolen his savings, and convinced him that he was losing his memory. He died believing he was a burden to everyone he loved, when the truth was that he was being systematically destroyed by a predator who saw him as nothing more than a source of money. But the most powerful victim impact statement came from someone unexpected: Patricia Webb, Jessica's own mother. "Your Honor," Patricia said, crying as she spoke, "I need to apologize to every person my daughter has hurt. I raised her, and I failed to recognize the monster she became. I am ashamed that someone who came from my family could cause such pain to innocent people. I support whatever sentence you believe is appropriate, because the person standing before you is not the daughter I thought I knew." The evidence presented by federal prosecutors painted a picture of criminal sophistication that was breathtaking in its scope and cruelty. Forensic accountants testified that Jessica's network had stolen over $6 million from elderly victims across 7 states. FBI agents presented evidence of at least 38 elderly individuals who had been systematically robbed, psychologically manipulated, and in many cases forcibly institutionalized while their assets were liquidated. Dr. Elena Rodriguez provided psychological testimony that was particularly damning. Jessica Webb represents the most dangerous type of predator, one who specifically targets the most vulnerable members of our society with calculated psychological manipulation designed to destroy their autonomy, dignity, and financial security, Dr. Rodriguez testified. Her complete lack of empathy, combined with sophisticated manipulation techniques, makes her an ongoing threat to any elderly individual she might encounter. But the most devastating evidence came from Jessica's own records. FBI agents had found what Jessica called her victim development files, comprehensive research dossiers on over 200 elderly individuals she had identified as potential targets. Each file contained detailed financial analysis, psychological profiles, family relationship assessments, and step-by-step plans for exploitation. My file was presented as evidence of the scope of her criminal planning. 87 pages of research, financial analysis, and psychological manipulation strategies, all designed to destroy my independence and steal everything I had worked for during my 40-year legal career. Your Honor, Agent Martinez testified, the defendant's planning documents reveal a level of criminal sophistication that represents an ongoing threat to elderly individuals throughout the United States. She had identified and researched potential victims in 12 states, with detailed plans for systematic exploitation that would have continued indefinitely if we had not stopped her. When Jessica was given the opportunity to address the court, her response revealed the complete absence of remorse or accountability that characterized her personality disorder. Your Honor, I believe I have been the victim of a misunderstanding, Jessica said with the same manipulative tone she had used to deceive her elderly victims. I was only trying to help elderly family members and friends manage their financial affairs. Everything I did was motivated by concern for their well-being. The audacity of her lies was breathtaking, but Judge Morrison's response demonstrated why federal justice is so effective in dealing with sophisticated criminals. Ms. Webb, Judge Morrison said with ice-cold authority, this court has reviewed extensive evidence of your criminal behavior, including recordings of your own voice describing your victims in derogatory terms and planning their systematic exploitation. Your attempt to characterize elder abuse, kidnapping, and theft as helping demonstrates exactly why you represent an ongoing danger to society. David's sentencing was equally comprehensive, though his cooperation with federal investigators had resulted in a slightly reduced sentence. David Collins, Judge Morrison continued, your willingness to betray your own mother for financial gain represents a level of moral bankruptcy that this court finds particularly disturbing. You used your position of trust as a son to facilitate crimes against the woman who sacrificed her own opportunities to provide for your future. David's attempt at an apology was pathetic and self-serving. Your Honor, I know I made terrible mistakes, but I was manipulated by Jessica into believing that what we were doing was somehow helping my mother. I never intended for things to go as far as they did. Judge Morrison's response eliminated any possibility that David could avoid responsibility for his criminal choices. Mr. Collins, the evidence presented to this court includes recordings of you discussing strategies for forging your mother's signature, planning her forced institutionalization, and calculating the profits from selling her home without her consent. These were not the actions of someone who was manipulated. These were the deliberate criminal choices of someone who viewed his own mother as an obstacle to wealth. The sentences were everything I had hoped for when I first began documenting their criminal behavior. Jessica was sentenced to life in federal prison without possibility of parole, plus additional consecutive sentences totaling 65 years. She would die in federal custody, never again able to harm another elderly person. David received 43 years in federal prison, meaning he would be over 100 years old before he could even be considered for parole. But the most satisfying aspect of their sentencing was the financial restitution order. Every asset they had ever acquired, every piece of property they owned, every bank account they had established was seized by federal authorities to compensate their victims. Jessica and David would leave prison, if they ever left prison, with absolutely nothing. As I watched them being led away in shackles to begin their federal sentences, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my retirement: the deep satisfaction of a case perfectly prosecuted and justice completely served. Jessica had thought she was targeting a confused old woman who would be easy to exploit and discard. Instead, she had declared war on someone who possessed 40 years of experience destroying predators exactly like her. The arrogant toast she had made at David's wedding, claiming ownership of my house, had awakened something in me that she couldn't have imagined in her worst nightmares. A legal predator who specialized in protecting vulnerable people from criminals like her. If you believe that those who prey on elderly family members deserve to spend their lives paying for their crimes, share this story with someone who needs to know that age is strength, not weakness, and that underestimating someone because of their years can be the most dangerous mistake a criminal ever makes. But my story wasn't finished yet. The most important lesson was still to come. 1 year after Jessica and David began their federal prison sentences, I stood in my garden, the same garden where Jessica had made her arrogant toast claiming ownership of my home, hosting a very different kind of celebration. The Silver Shield Network that Judge Stevens had introduced me to was holding its annual conference at my house, bringing together over 50 retired legal professionals who had dedicated their post-retirement years to protecting elderly individuals from predators. The irony was perfect. The house Jessica had so confidently declared as hers had become the headquarters for a movement that would protect thousands of elderly people from criminals exactly like her. Hannah, Judge Stevens said as she addressed the assembled group, your case has become the gold standard for how elderly individuals can protect themselves from family-based financial predators. The legal precedents established through your prosecution of Jessica and David have been used in over 200 similar cases across the country. The impact of our case had exceeded even my most optimistic expectations. Federal prosecutors were using our evidence collection methods and legal strategies as training materials for elder abuse investigations nationwide. The recording techniques, documentation procedures, and psychological manipulation identification systems we had developed were being implemented by law enforcement agencies in all 50 states. But the most meaningful consequence was personal. Mrs. Margaret Chen, the 83-year-old woman who had been one of Jessica's previous victims, had moved back to her own home after federal restitution payments restored her stolen assets. She called me every week to share updates about her renewed independence and to thank me for the courage to expose the criminal network that had destroyed her life. Hannah, dear, she had said during our most recent conversation, you showed all of us that being elderly doesn't mean being helpless. Because of your strength, I got my life back, and I'm not afraid anymore." Harold Peterson's children had established a foundation in their father's memory dedicated to educating elderly individuals about financial predators and providing resources for families dealing with elder abuse. They credited our case with giving them the closure they needed to heal from their father's suspicious death. "Mrs. Collins," Sarah Peterson had written in a letter that still brings tears to my eyes, "your courage in exposing Jessica's crimes gave our father the justice he deserved and prevented countless other families from experiencing the pain we went through. You turned our tragedy into protection for others." The federal investigation that began with our case had ultimately resulted in the prosecution of over 60 individuals involved in elder abuse networks across multiple states. The fraudulent assisted living facilities had been permanently shut down, the fake medical professionals had lost their licenses and faced criminal prosecution, and the financial institutions that had enabled these crimes had implemented new protection protocols for elderly clients. But perhaps the most important outcome was the psychological impact our case had on the broader conversation about aging and vulnerability in America. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had published a comprehensive study based on our case that was being used in psychology and criminology programs nationwide to train professionals about the sophisticated manipulation techniques used by elder abuse predators. Hannah's case demonstrates that the assumption of elderly vulnerability is not only incorrect but dangerous, Dr. Rodriguez had written. Predators like Jessica Webb specifically target elderly individuals because society has conditioned us to view age as weakness rather than recognizing the wisdom, experience, and resources that many elderly individuals possess. The media coverage of our case had sparked a national conversation about ageism and the systematic underestimation of elderly individuals' capabilities. Major news networks had featured our story as an example of how societal assumptions about aging make elderly people more vulnerable to exploitation, not because they are actually incapable, but because predators assume they will be underestimated and underprotected. My own role in this broader movement had evolved beyond anything I had imagined when I first discovered Jessica's betrayal. I had been invited to speak at law schools, medical schools, and social work programs about recognizing and preventing elder abuse. My presentations focused on the sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques used by predators and the legal strategies elderly individuals could use to protect themselves. The most important lesson from my experience, I would tell audiences, is that predators count on society viewing elderly people as confused, helpless, and grateful for any attention from younger family members. They use our supposed vulnerability as a weapon against us, but they make a critical mistake. They assume that age equals helplessness, when in reality, age often equals wisdom, experience, and resources that can be devastating to criminals who underestimate us. The legal community had embraced our case as a model for how retired professionals could use their expertise to protect vulnerable community members. Morrison & Associates had established a pro bono elder abuse prevention program that provided free legal services to elderly individuals who suspected they were being targeted by financial predators. James Morrison had told me that our case had inspired dozens of retired attorneys to offer their services to similar protection efforts. "Hannah, what you accomplished has shown our profession that retirement doesn't mean retirement from justice. You've created a movement of experienced legal professionals who are using their skills to protect the most vulnerable members of our society." But the most personally meaningful outcome was the restoration of my relationship with family and community. Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor who had first alerted me to Jessica and David's planning conversations, had become one of my closest friends. She often joined me for coffee in the garden where Jessica had made her arrogant toast, and we would laugh about how completely Jessica had misunderstood who she was dealing with. "Hannah," she had said recently, "I've been thinking about that wedding toast Jessica made." She declared herself the new owner of this house, but what she really did was declare war on someone who had spent 40 years learning how to destroy people exactly like her. She couldn't have made a bigger mistake if she had tried. The house itself had become a symbol of resistance against elder abuse. I had established a trust that would eventually convert it into a resource center for elderly individuals dealing with family-based financial exploitation, ensuring that Jessica's attempt to steal my home would ultimately result in permanent protection for future victims. My relationship with David was permanently severed, and I felt no sadness about that decision. His willingness to betray his own mother for financial gain had revealed a fundamental absence of character that made any meaningful relationship impossible. The 43 years he would spend in federal prison were a consequence of his own criminal choices, not a tragedy I needed to mourn. But I had gained something far more valuable than the relationship I had lost: the deep satisfaction of knowing that my experience had been transformed into protection for thousands of other elderly individuals who might otherwise have become victims of similar predators. As I concluded my remarks to the Silver Shield Conference that evening, I looked around at the faces of retired judges, attorneys, FBI agents, and other professionals who had dedicated their later years to protecting vulnerable elderly community members. "My friends," I said, "Jessica Webb thought she was targeting a lonely, confused old woman who would be grateful for attention from a younger family member. She had no idea she was declaring war on someone who had spent 4 decades learning exactly how to destroy criminals like her." I paused, looking at the garden where Jessica had made her fatal mistake of underestimating me. Let this be a lesson to anyone who thinks that age equals weakness. We are not victims waiting to be exploited. We are survivors who have accumulated knowledge, resources, and determination that predators cannot imagine. We are not the confused, helpless elderly people that criminals assume we are. We are dangerous to anyone who threatens the vulnerable members of our community. The applause that followed wasn't just appreciation for my words. It was recognition of a truth that Jessica and David had learned too late: that underestimating someone because of their age can be the most dangerous mistake a predator ever makes. As our guests departed that evening, I sat alone in my living room, looking at the space where Jessica had spread out the documents she thought would complete my destruction. Instead, that room had become the place where federal agents had arrested her and dismantled her entire criminal network. Jessica's arrogant toast at David's wedding, "To the new owner of this house," had indeed marked the beginning of a new ownership. But the new owner wasn't Jessica. It was justice, served by someone who understood that age is not weakness, experience is not confusion, and wisdom is the most powerful weapon against those who prey on the vulnerable. Remember this lesson: when predators target you because they think your age makes you weak, show them that your years have made you dangerous. Subscribe and share this story with anyone who needs to know that the most dangerous mistake a criminal can make is underestimating someone who has spent decades learning exactly how to destroy people like them. The house Jessica tried to steal had become a fortress protecting elderly people from predators. Her attempt to make me a victim had instead made me a protector of thousands of others. That is the true power of turning your supposed weakness into your greatest strength.